Welcome everyone to another episode, and I'm really excited today to have Mario here. And I just briefly want to introduce him and why he's here and why I'm so excited for this. Is Mario's a man who grew up in Lebanon in a reality where bombs were being dropped. And I just want you to imagine that reality for a moment, the unsafety in your everyday life and your body and the trauma that would create for you. And something beautiful that came through that was Mario, that drove him to become really ambitious. And he moved to Australia and he studied medicine and he was top of his class. He was athletic, like really driven. And the system and the people in the system wanted to, really leverage his potential to become a specialist. And he really saw that the people ahead of him, the leaders, though, were in the cardiology, for example, were obese men looking after other people's hearts, giving them medications, and these people kept coming back, and it was like they were putting band-aids on. And Mario started to question what's going on here. And why I resonate with that is because in my own business journey, I had the same thing. I looked to the leaders who I'm meant to be inspired by, and I started to question things. And I think that's a really critical thing, to begin to question things. And so from there, Mario went on a journey to find his authentic self and his nature. And that took him from everything from traveling to Nepal, to Lebanon, to the USA, to South America, to studying holistic and alternative forms of health, such as nutrition, neurolinguistics, the psychosomatic medicine, to understand that everything is connected to the mind. And then also took his own plant medicine journeys, 30 overseas. And that really helped him heal that trauma that was all the way there from his childhood and find his voice. And part of that, sitting with, one of the 10 indigenous mothers of the earth, to the chiefs of Native American tribes, to discover that one of his missions here is to really support holistic health and integrating psychedelics into medicine. The approach that encompasses emotions and health and finances and sexuality. And today he sits as an advisory member on the panel for Mind Medicine Australia, developing holistic programs as well for general practitioners that integrate things that weren't there in the studies around nutrition, Chinese medicine, naturopathy, but also integrating what is learned, right, in medicine. And so I want to welcome you here, Mario, today. That background is incredible, and I can't wait to just dive in and explore this with you.
Thank you, Kristian, for that beautiful invitation and introduction, and deep gratitude for holding space for open conversations with people as well, because these spaces allow these transmissions to occur for us to really delve into what's possible for the future by opening up these pathways of connection. I remember when we connected, we've had this deep remembrance and deep portal of opening, and our souls are very connected in a way that remind us there's a deeper work for us to do. So I'm really excited about delving into today as well.
Amazing. And we have, we have had this connection in this human experience, but we have gone into, you could say, other places and states where there is that deep remembrance. And why I'm excited to bring you here is because something that really fascinates me is the unification and the merger of science and spirituality and the truth that's in there. And, people in our world that I've realized will only listen to certain people that hold a certain background or stature or education or position. And I feel that really gives you this unique, purpose or ability in this world to be able to speak to more people. And I'm curious in your experience, because you've gone from, studying medicine and being, one of the tops of your class through to more of an alternative path that maybe some, people that study medicine or GPs don't go down. What have you noticed in your own path and therefore your relationship with people that are in the medicine path that maybe haven't explored other paths? Has that been challenging for you, or how have you navigated that in your journey?
Across humanity and across society, we've always seen that there's always a minority of population that forges forward, And I don't think it's any different in the modern world. We just have a larger population in the planet, but that collective of people that are forging forward, I see myself as part of that collective. And there's experience to be experienced as that collective. We experience profound states of consciousness, of connectedness, of exploring what's possible beyond the frameworks of our conditionings and our programmings of our childhood and our culture. But also with that comes the experience of being isolated from the norm, or persecuted from the norm, or by the norm. And definitely, although my experience I would not replace in any way, shape or form, it hasn't been an easy pathway to get to where I am today, but in that has been a lot of internal growth and realizations. And in that, I can also sit with a lot more certainty, having gone through the ins and outs and the struggles and the highs of the experience. Having, you know, if you look at me as a child, I was quite a normal little kid playing and exploring, but I was also quite empathic. I would feel quite a lot. And going through, I had disconnected from the body through the traumas of my childhood that brought me into my mind going through. And it wasn't until my 30s that I really realized that I was living through my mind rather than embodied state of my being. And when I brought those aspects of myself together and found my voice within that and reconnected that to my higher self and my grounded self, I started to find the space that felt authentic, it felt real, it felt alive with what was present for me in the moment. And from that space, I allow life to unfold. Not to say that's always the case, but definitely that journey itself. But through that has also been the hero's journey, the attacks or the challenges that allow that goal to be seen for what it was, to allow that transformation, to awaken that state of awareness beyond the physical. If we look at the stages, whether it be the Christ consciousness or the Buddha consciousness, they're always depicted in a physical state with a auric field around them. And I believe that's our natural state of being. And how do we learn to return to that which we are born into?
I love that, because this journey started for me actually being sick. Yeah, I was chronically sick with sinus infections for 7 years, allergic to dust, pollen, mold. And I just went to, at the time, General Practitioner who gave me antibiotics. I went to allergist who wanted to pump my bloodstream with dust mites, and injured my back twice, pulled my hamstring, injured my Achilles, went to the physios. And I just kept managing my way for years. And I thought that was the reality. And only when I got adrenal fatigue and had a rash on my whole body did I start to go, okay, no, I need to do something else. And I got a holistic health coach. I went outside the system that was prescribed to me at the time, and that awoken me to nutrition. And then, as you're kind of saying, presence, meditation, yoga, things that weren't in my awareness. And I started to question, hang on, this social construct of what's been shared with me or told to me or educated to me, you know. And what I really appreciate about your journey is, you know, having that, we have this traditional educations, is when I meet a person that comes from another industry, whether it's medicine or it's person in blue collar that's been working in a mine, that has this experience, that has them access a higher dimension or a truth or a being, is there's so much unification in that, because it doesn't matter what we studied or the job or the title or what people see of us externally. There's this interconnectedness when a soul begins to awaken. It doesn't matter your gender, your job title, your IQ, but you did mention that word empathy. And there's a certain sensitivity that I feel and hear from you in that word. And you mentioned sages. And, you know, I have this next to me. I don't know, have you read this book?
I've read parts of it over time. It's another story at some level. Yeah.
And his guru speaks to, you know, 100 years ago, having all these doctors and lawyers come to him and challenge him with all the intellectual stuff they've learned. And he would just be able to speak right through it. And they would almost be very stunned. So there's this timeless wisdom, and you talk about aura and being in nature, that on this journey for you, through your studies, through studying all these, nutrition, neurolinguistics, traveling the world, all of this, it's like, you were saying that the hero's journey, you were seeking something. What is it that this, soul, this man in you was seeking? And what is it that you found on that journey?
It's a big question there, Kristian. I believe that our biggest journey in life is to understand who we are, and in that is actually to let go of every barrier or every trauma, every things of separation that take us away from who we are at our essence. And it's like the painting of Michelangelo, where the hand of God with the hand of man, and it's always going to be slightly out of touch. And what that speaks to me is that aspect that we'll always be exploring what that infinite potential within ourselves is, which is a God nature within us. And just out of reach, will always be more for us to learn and to grow. Through having experienced states of consciousness through plant medicines, it's taken me to that 0 point, that null point, that where it's pure consciousness beyond the egoic mind. And in those states, it's a reminder of the true nature of who we are beyond the physical realm. And so there's this search of how to find as many strands of and pathways to keep that connection in the awareness, both in the mind, in the body, in the soul, and the spirit, and to keep that vibrancy of that connection alive. Although we may not necessarily be living in that purity of that consciousness, but it's like a river that streams forward. At first you got a little stream, and over time the water forges a bigger path, and eventually forms into a river. And so it's the same thing with our connection to our true essence and our source nature, is to be first aware of that connection and to keep feeding that space and keep cultivating it so that it becomes a pillar of energy that flows between ourselves and that divine nature.
I really hear it's the deep part in you that looks for something beyond the surface level of maybe what we're told in this world, or that happens on the TV. It's the same part in me that is always looking for the truth or the meaning, and it's had me go through so many industries and jobs. I'm a terrible employee because you can't hold me, because I'm just looking for the truth, and I can't be sold into the conquer the world or make lots of money to do this. And what you speak to are states of consciousness that some people have accessed and some have not, and some can be in the sages for an extended period of time, if not infinite, and some others we tap into, and then it's like a taste, and then there's to go to open up that little stream into a river. And plant medicine has become a thing that you feel is very important for yourself and the world. And the work that you're doing at the moment, I know a little bit about the politics and the history of what happened in the 60s in the US, but I would just love to get a feel from you around the state of where things are in the world, the openness of communities, you know, especially, you know, the medical community and the psychology community, where we're at, you know, what you can even touch on if you'd like to, you know, what happened in the 60s, like it feels like we got stalled, and now it's like this revitalization of that. So I would love for you to just talk at that macro level, where you feel we're at.
Great question. And I'm really excited where we are going at the moment.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of hitting this kind of crevice point in humanity at the moment, and it's almost as there's a contraction that's happening at the moment, there's also that expansion that's also available through that. There's a polarization that we're going to be experiencing. And before I go into what's happening, I'll just touch base in terms of back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
The work that was done by Hoffman and the pioneers of psychedelic movement at the time. A lot of that Dennis Leary as well. A lot of stuff was shut down at that point in time. Although there was a lot of studies, and the Institute of like Esalen in the States was doing some incredible emergent psychology that was happening. And what happened back in the Vietnam War, because a lot of people were taking acid and suddenly becoming free love and no war, as a political movement, the government at the time, the Nixon government, decided to put a ban on all drugs as a way to control the people of the time and prevent them from rebelling against the movement for the support of the war. And so what we saw was then this war on drugs that started, and that permeated and suppressed the incredible research that was happening for a good 40, 50 years. And so now we're finding is that modern psychiatry, with all its advances, and there's been some great advances in terms of psychology, cognitive awareness, we're still just tapping into the embodiment of that and how the trauma is connected to the body. I'd love to speak to that in some point. I think is really essential. Then what we realize in the antidepressants, although we don't necessarily know why they're working necessarily, we do start to realize that they're failing our population. And a lot of people are becoming resistant as no longer working because we're looking at medicine in the wrong way. We're looking at through tunnel vision rather than looking at through the openness of what's possible. And so what the psychedelic medicines, more specifically with MDMA and psilocybin, is promising these emergent medicines for the future to help with treating depression with psilocybin, which makes sense. It's mycelium reconnecting the fibers of our brain, which allow the firing of our natural state of when we're born to reignite back again, so it can actually also ignite that field of consciousness beyond the physical also. And with MDMA, to its use with the use of trauma and PTSD to down-regulate that trauma experience where the amygdala is so conditioned in that flight-fight response that each time a person gets triggered, it goes into this repatterning of that trauma, and the person's physiology goes into flight-fight and they're not able to rationalize their thinking. So what MDMA does is helps to down-regulate that amygdala response and allows a person's frontal cortex to start to function, to rationalize, well, this person acted this way because of this, and I'm able to see the different perspective rather than to go into the contracted flight-fight response of that. And so already we're seeing in the States a lot of places like Colorado, and I think California's also legalized it with psilocybin. MDMA is starting to become prescribed for extreme cases. In Canada, we see already legalization across the board for cannabis, and we're starting to see a lot of the advances with the psilocybin becoming legalized in many states. In Australia, we're on the verge of that as we speak, and that's why I'm excited for what's happening here.
Just touching on that, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but like you're saying, the psilocybin is reconnecting pathways, right? It's like a creation. The MDMA is just, you know, supporting the amygdala just to come down so we can just get more clarity. And it's almost create those connections again. For things like, you know, marijuana or ketamine or these other ones, how would you describe, like, what I'm trying to get to is, are they doing different things or are they doing a similar thing?
Ultimately, they're activating different parts of the system to calm and to bring central awareness of the individual to what's present. And you know, we're not God to understand. Now we're an aspect of God, but we're not the creator to understand the fullness of consciousness in what each one takes. And for example, with cannabis, you look at the cannabinoid systems. We already have a cannabinoid system in our body, which is generally not activated. And so when somebody takes something like CBD, which is one of the components of that being CBD and Ellen's THC of the marijuana, the CBD helps to activate the cannabinoid system to relax the body. And if you're able to relax the body's not in tension, it's not a flight response. The ketamine, my understanding of it is that it takes into a dissolution of identity and self. So a person who's in a very deep state of depression, where they are feeling a sense of overwhelm, of chaos, and they can't understand their way through it to find that inner solace. It allows the dissolvement of the connection to the physical and even energetic, to some degree, of that trauma that's created the chaos of the individual, to allow them to come back into that space of null or nothingness, where some people often go into a K-hole and find peace in that, or can also find severe state of anxiety if the ego is strong and not able to let go. So definitely each one has their different aspects of contribution to that dissolvement of the ego, and that coming back into that 0 point to observe consciousness. The MDMA and psilocybin are providing the front headers at the moment. Cannabis is already becoming legalized, and that's already done a lot of good in the community. At the moment, I feel that the MDMA and the psilocybin are probably going to be the biggest game changers in terms of our movement towards a appreciation of a psychedelic state and its contribution to the psyche and the psychiatric development of the human.
Yeah. And then coming to that piece when you said around the body carries the trauma, would love to hear, so these medicines are supporting someone in the trauma and someone coming back to their more natural state, letting go of, brain pathways or things that are not supporting them. And this idea that the body's keeping the trauma, and connecting this to physical disease and physical ailments, like in your understanding, the research, right? So, because, I know your approach has been about preventative, and I look at the world and it's like the medicine, it's like people just accept, I've got cancer, I've got this disease, let me treat this. But I would love to hear your perspective. How do these medicines, or how does this approach that's psychosomatic or about the mind or the pathways, how does this connect to physical disease? How does this connect to trauma? How does it connect to the physical body and illness?
When a child experiences trauma, what happens? For example, a little kid takes another kid's toy, and the little kid gets angry. And what happens is that that kid goes into this tight response in their body, and the anger often can be held around the heart or the throat for not having communicated what their needs are, or can be like in their arms because they want to fight and just kind of hold themselves back, or whatever it is, whatever trauma a child experiences. It's not the actual trauma itself that's a problem or the challenge. It's how the child, if the child is left alone in their experience and they feel themselves isolated in that trauma, that they go into contraction, and that becomes a energetic imprinting onto their body. That emotional disconnection is then also an available pathway for them to actually open up again later in life. But as a child, that becomes a trauma that gets connected at a somatic level into their body. You look at in Chinese medicine, there's particular parts that things are stored. For example, where do we store anger in our body?
In the liver. Right?
In the liver. Where do we store sadness in our body?
In the heart.
The heart and also the lungs.
The lungs.
Where do we store fear?
In the stomach, intestines.
The kidneys.
Kidneys, okay, yeah.
And if you look at the kidneys, the lower back is the area that we give the least amount of attention to. It's our first stages of development is the subconscious part of our body. This is our subconscious part of our body. This is our conscious part of our body. And so these first developments of the base and the sacral. So the fear and also our connection and to us, to others, to our primary caregiver, our connection to our community. But this aspect of fear is what pervades a lot of humans, because we're afraid of who we are at that deepest and divine level. And so we become disconnected, where we become more in our mind rather than in our body as we develop through. And then we look at additional, the shoes that we wear that disconnect us from our body, by the circuitry that disconnects us from the earth, or our education system that takes us more into the mind, rather than like Steiner school that takes us back into our body through movement and dance and music. And then you look at the toxins that are often given to children, such as aluminium, that causes a neurotoxicity to the system as it crosses the blood-brain barrier and shuts down the nervous system, that also then shuts down the field of energy and disconnection to source. Now, with all these, and these are the patterns that are existing at an earlier level. But does that lead to disease at that point? No, not at that point in time. But what does happen is it starts to put the seeds of trauma that's remembered, and that connection between the body and the mind becomes ignited. So each time a child experiences, say, anger, that triggered response that has not been integrated then becomes into fight response, and they go into chaos, and they don't know how to process that, or they have a parenting that helps them to support and to move through that, which is ideal. But if they don't, it becomes another layer of density of a somatic nature, which after a while that becomes more and more densified into different parts of the body or different parts of the organ system or system. Now, if we look at that, creates stress, because it's not, the body is not in a state of ease. And so when look at then the stress hormone, cortisol. Cortisol is our body's normal production when we have a stress response. It's used as a way to create the adrenaline, the activation to run, to save, to fight, to respond. It's an important stress response, but it also is anti-inflammatory. And that anti-inflammatory component is key in terms of reducing disease processes, autoimmune diseases, cancer cells. And if we have a prolonged stress response, we have the cortisol being risen, and that prolonged cortisol level and that anti-inflammatory component, if that stress remains prolonged for a long period of time, eventually starts to wear down and starts to become depleted. And so when somebody with a skin condition goes to the dermatologist with, like, say, dermatitis or eczema, what does the dermatologist give them?
A cream.
What kind of cream?
Is it an anti-inflammatory thing?
A steroid.
Yeah, steroid, yeah.
When somebody has asthma and they go see a lung specialist, what do they give them?
A puffer?
Usually a steroid.
Yeah, nice.
If a person's got Crohn's disease, which is an inflammatory bowel disease, or ulcerative colitis, and they go see a gastroenterologist, what do they give them? Steroids. And so we're using steroids on a regular basis to reduce inflammation in the body of diseases that have been expressed in the body. But what's been really poorly looked into is how this stress response prolonged due to the multifactorial things that have happened in that person's life and the depletion of the natural anti-inflammatory state of that individual then allows the arising of those states in the absence of anti-inflammation, that allows the cancers to rise, or you look at the states of disease like Crohn's or ulcerative colitis or activation of asthma or dermatitis. And not to say that that's the only factor, that being stress, but it's an important factor.
Yeah. Well, it even reminds me, you know, when I was chronically sick for 7 years, right? The doctor would always say, you need to rest, it's stress, but he was never trained in what to do about it. You know, I might say, you know, meditate. And, you know, since me doing all these different modalities, meditation, yoga, through to network spinal and all these different things, and supporting clients in my mentoring coaching, right, with this healing of these childhood traumas, all these different things, right, is when you were asking which body parts connect to what, it's like, again, I don't know specifically the exact organs you kind of saw, because I'm in the discovery of it with people for my own body and life and others. And this is something I really appreciate, is like our education, left brain, is like, you need to know everything and think everything. And it's almost this stressful way of obtaining knowledge versus lightening this thing, allowing the body to learn to trust, and then to discover what I want to call truth, or some layer or level of truth. And so many of us in the learning, we read something, we take that as gospel. You know, when I studied business for 6 years, I just took everything I was learning as that's the truth, until I did honors and I had to do my own research, get a question, collect my own data, doing the answers, and critique other people's research. Did I realize that, you know, the true science or the research, like this whole life is the experiment. I am the experiment. My body is the experiment, through personal experience and through working with others. And you know what you're speaking to there, that I have come to discover what you're saying there, not through reading all the academic research or the different things, but this disease or these ailments, there's another root cause. And you know, you spoke to earlier the mind. You know, I'd love for you to speak to the mind, like the mind being connected to our whole reality, to the thoughts we have, the job we have, the financial situation, the body, the illness, the choices we make of medicines or what we do, like the power of that mind. I would love for you to speak to that, you know, any understanding or the connections between the mind and everything, the body, our lives.
I don't know if I could give that answer a true justice of the fullness of that question, because I think we're only starting to really understand the mind, and at the same time, both the potency, but also the destructive nature of the mind. Also, you've studied meditation. And what do you find the key to meditation is for you?
So I first started meditation with, you could say, mindfulness or different practices. And what I noticed is it increased the reaction time or the response time I have from stimulus to a response. So my senses started to become more sensitive, and therefore I can hear things further away. You know, someone says something to me and there's an activation, I have more time to consciously process, control before responding. Now, the technique I currently practice is Vedic meditation, which is a transcendental technique. which is a mantra. And that is the repetition of a Sanskrit sound that has, you could say, my conscious mind go to sleep in some sense, or settle, relax, the subconscious or the body, taking out the stresses from the day. The deeper I go, traumas from the life, and an access to the superconscious mind, you might call source, God, heart, intuition. And what I have noticed, it's hard to isolate in my experiment because I'm doing so many other modalities and things at the same time. But if I look at the moment from when I started this technique through to now, I have tears come out of my eyes. Every time I meditate, I have discharge coming out of my nose. My intuitive interpretation of that has become that stress or emotion is stored in the mucus or in the ducts as well, the lymphatic system. And I also now have a response that is a purge. It's like a vomit, like, but nothing comes out. And I feel shivers through my body. And, the experiment is when I'm even driving, sometimes I have this now, like I'm just constantly purging and yawning and having stuff come through across certain areas of land. When I rocked up to a friend's place the other day after this full purge, I walked in, she goes, wow, you look so clear. So my interpretation of this is my eyes are clear, the face is clear, is that this technique is, as you would say, relaxing the amygdala, the conscious mind, allowing the body, which I believe is so intelligent, to just do its work itself, and therefore have my ego less attachment of this identity or this body or this thing, for me to have it feels like it even goes beyond the senses, if there was the senses and something else, to connect to some greater field or force where I do feel that ego I feel connected. It's like the nature and me become less separate and everything around me becomes more one, and there's a purification effect. So that's my experience with meditation and the mind per se.
And what I'm hearing from you is it's spaciousness that's created in that to perceive the space in a more with more mindfulness, with more awareness, and almost like the almost expanded state of consciousness that exists in that, when the quietening of the mind. And so this is a part that I speak to, is the mind can be quite active, and it can be an ally and also can be an adversary. It can support us, but can also destroy us. And so how we choose to engage with the mind, it will either be to, it'll either contract our field or our body, or expand our field and our body and our awareness. But ultimately is to come back into that stillness point and be in the eye of all that's happening, which is where God resides, in the eye of that inner beloved.
So I'd say that it's like, we're starting to speak to, there are plant medicines and there are a lot of modalities that help what you speak to, right? The stress response come down, the body to heal, different things to happen. Like there's lots of different modalities. And there's a book, Letting Go, David Hawkins. Have you read that one?
It's been passed to me recently. Interesting you mentioned it.
So he has about 5 pages in there that lists, if you have a problem, and then it lists every modality. Go see a shrink, go do an ice bath, meditate. And I found myself laughing as I was reading this, because I was like, my seeker has sought so many of these modalities. But the essence of the message is they all point to the same thing. It's letting go of some hold, some contraction, some trauma, some neural pathway that's been created over time that causes our body to, right, be lopsided, or all this, right? So there's all these modalities. I want anyone watching this to know that each person has to find the calling to the modality that feels right for them, because one person could meditate and get nothing from it. Their system is just can't drop into it. Someone could have the plant medicine and it just works perfectly for them, but vice versa, right? There's all these, it's about where that person's at. I would love to hear your take on that, speaking specific to plant medicine. Like, who is it right for, or is it right for everyone? And in what setting and context, is a person ready, and this is going to support them in that journey of letting go, healing, improving their mental, physical, all aspects of their health. You know, what's the calling for that?
If I can answer it in two parts. Is one is like because the plant medicine is an ally, but not to fall into dependency onto the plant medicine is an important distinction. And so what you spoke about, which is I feel is very important to support the work of the plant medicine and have the plant medicine support it, is what are the different therapies, different things that are ultimately going to allow us to integrate what is learned in the medicines. I'm going to speak to that first, because I think it's really important to acknowledge the responsibility that each individual has, not to rely on the plant medicines as their gateway to connect back to source and to their true nature, but to realize the work that's involved when you come back. And that's really where a lot of people I feel fail in our society, is they become use it as a crutch. Whereas, I can only feel myself if I go into medicine, or I need the medicine to purge me out or to clean me out. It's like, no, we have all the available things available to us. And the key is, how do we bring that wisdom back here? And from that, I've developed a lot of my work with holistic medicine and what I do in my practice. And why I believe I'm effective with that is what is looking at, I'm not a solitary individual. I'm actually part of a collective of beings that are all helping to rise consciousness for an individual when I work with somebody. In Australia, I don't have any patients with heart disease, no one with strokes. I haven't had any new diabetic patients. I haven't seen cancer for the last 6 years, just by applying these holistic approaches. So I'm about to share is what I've learned and experienced over those years and its effectiveness in this population. But what's also important is that the individual take responsibility. That's quintessential, because this aspect of where you go to a medicine, or you go to a GP, or you go to a practitioner, and then you tell them, fix me. No, it's not going to work. You need to meet the practitioner halfway, or you need to meet the medicine halfway. You need to take self-responsibility and learn how to stand up on your own 2 feet, because ultimately the answer is there within you. We are just simply helping you to find all the locks, all the blocks that allow you to expand and awaken into your true nature. And so if we look at, on a holistic level, how we can integrate the medicines already is the aspect of detoxification. How do we cleanse the body? So you look at whether working with a naturopath, or working with Ayurveda or Chinese medicine to help detoxify. There's quite a lot of online resources. I just want to check with you, Kristian, because it could be quite a big conversation on this aspect of holistic medicine and integration to plant medicine. Would you like me to focus on that, or plant medicines directly?
No, I think continue on the path you're on. Yeah.
If we look at toxins in our body, and toxins can come from very, very different things. We can go to toxins coming in from heavy metals, from injectables, from foods that are not organic, to environmental pollutants, to emotional toxins, to things we put in our skin, things that we ingest. A lot of different toxins come into our systems. And for a lot of people, they're not even aware that their detox pathways may be blocked. And so it's often having to look at with a practitioner, is the detox pathways opened or closed? Because if they're blocked, then invariably the lymphatics get blocked, and that's the channels for where the disease starts to be permeated through. Now, when our way of often detoxification is through our skin, through expiration, the most important one's through our gut. But what happens is through our gut is that when it comes to the last part of our bowels, often things are reabsorbed back into the enterohepatic circulation. And so toxins keep on recirculating around. And so the body doesn't have necessarily the capacity to detoxify what is probably needed. And so things like clay, or charcoal, or zeolites, or colonics are ways to help pull things out of the system and allow it to come out through through the gut without it going through the enterohepatic circulation. So that's the first part I want to speak to, because often a lot of people will continue holding toxins, and because there's a medicine which is I need to mention is illegal in Australia, but it's can find it in different parts of the world, called Cambo. And I'm not promoting this, but just so you know, but just mentioning this as a medicine to help detoxify the lymphatic system, because what it does, it bypasses the enterohepatic circulation, allows the lymphatics to contract and expel the toxins to then be purged out. And so that allows the channels to open up. So detoxification is important. And then what does your body need in terms of nutrients to support itself? So vegetarians often will be lacking zinc, B12 or iron, and how to support what each individual's unique genetic and alchemical journey is to support their functional self. The core of the body being how we hold ourselves in ourselves, because if your core starts to weaken, your body starts to go into pain and suffering, and pain and suffering causes loops in our minds where we can find it harder to let go. And so making sure we have a regular practice of activating our core, whether it be Pilates or Qigong or particular yoga which involves core work or weights, is really important to hold that center, to then allow the flexibility of yoga practices or Qigong practices to stretch out the body so that we can meet the physical to the fascial energetic level. So you can actually expand and open up the consciousness through the physical body, because the body, when it goes into trauma, it causes contraction. And so to open that up, it needs to have the core strong to then allow that flowering of the body to really open up to its fullness to then meet the energetic. Yeah. So then you look at things like acupuncture to help the body move and help the flow of the body moving through. You look at things like craniosacral to help the nervous system to calm down and to allow the what do you call it, cerebrospinal fluid to flow through the spine. And the trauma work to help to clear all the emotional cobwebs that have been causing the contractions in that field. And that needs to be detoxified completely. And I'd hold programs called Reset that create a systematic approach to expand that energetic field in terms of health, emotions, relationships, finances, business, spirituality, sexuality, so that you can expand beyond that contraction point that has been permitted through life. And having opened up that expansion point then allows the cobwebs to be transformed as you transform all those densities that have been caught up in the physical body, to allow them to stir and to open up, to see the gold in them as they transform, to awaken the highest self, to ground back into that trauma all the way from adult life to childhood, to birth, to past lives, to past generations, all the way through to the very core, which is holding the very seed of our spirit and our soul at the deepest level. And all these traumas that have been permeated in that early phase are the very, very keys and locks that allow us to awaken that which is being held protected in the center of our being. And then you smash it a little bit with some breath work to leave it open, expand it out completely, and shake those rattles of that cobweb out of system to come back into your center and awaken that true essence of who you are.
And I resonate with everything you just shared there. And this voice comes into my mind, which I think of some of my clients or just people in general. It's like I'm on board with that protocol. But for people that are still in this working 9 to 5, you know, that have time after work or are in stress a lot of the day and then the weekend, you know, there's the lifelong, you know, truth seeker that will make this a thing. But there's the people that are, you know, going to work, having some ailment, getting the quick fix, but they want to get over it. But it requires an energetic, financial, and time investment to do everything that you just said there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you see, like, in the world that I live in now, I've let go of so much identities, jobs. I haven't worked a normal job for it. So it's like anything's possible for me in the reality I'm in, right? But for people that are still not there, haven't let go of a lot yet, it's like where to begin and how to start taking these steps to know what's the right thing for them at the beginning.
It's a hard question to answer because it's really individual for each person, because ultimately it has to come from within that person to make the change. You look at a dog that sits on a nail, and the nail digs into the dog, but the dog doesn't get up and do something about it. It's only when the nail digs in hard enough that the dog will get up and do something about it. And that's something the nature of humanity, to be honest with you, where we look at a frog that's put into boiling water. The frog will step out. Whereas you put a frog into tepid water and you boil it slowly, and you find that the frog will boil itself to death.
Wow.
And these aspects, I think we have to have compassion for the human experience as it is, because there's been a lot of things that have actually caused the deconditioning and the desensitization of human beings. And many of them I've already alluded to early on, that being the disconnection from trauma to the toxins that have been given to our children, to the shoes that we wear, to the societal imprintings and conditions that we've experienced, to the education system that puts us in the mind, disconnects us from the body. And so that becomes to a point where a person may not do something until they probably have an experience of disease. Just like yourself, it took as aspect of disease, and it was the same thing with me. I developed something called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, where as a young kid I had major speech impediments, slurred speech, and all the way through I would always be learning how to improve my communication to step into my authentic self. But it was only when my body attacked my thyroid and I developed something called Hashimoto's that I started to look at what is it about nutrition. What is it about my connection to my voice and to who I am? And how do I help to remedy these so that I can come back to the wholeness of who I am and heal my Hashimoto's? And that's a lifelong journey in itself as well. And so it takes often an ailment or a nail to dig in before somebody will make that change. But when that does happen, it's for some they'll go and take medication, or they'll look for a quick fix, and it takes an individual's willingness to trust their own return to themselves, to give the honor and reverence of their own soul, to dig in deeper and find that inner warrior, that inner strength to actually go through that hero's journey that they must go through to awaken themselves into who they are. And sometimes plant medicines may be a quick breakthrough for that individual, because the pathway to come back in is so arduous and so long when they get to that nail that it may become too big of a hurdle for them to jump, that sometimes they need just a wake-up call with medicine journey to take them back to their true nature, provided that it's given support and compassion before and afterwards, and more so importantly is afterwards, because that journey is arduous and long for that individual, and they must walk that if they're to come back into their healing. But that's an important hurdle that can shift them out of their permanence that they may have experienced so far.
I love what you said there, and appreciate, in my experience for myself and the people I meet, it is a nail that starts the journey. It is a disease, or it could be a divorce. And you said lifelong journey, it really is. And, for people to see, it's not just a quick fix, or I do this journey and that's it, it is the willingness to do the lifelong journey. It doesn't matter what age you are, in this physical body in reality. it begins when it begins, whether it's, 7 years old or it's 60, and it is that journey to self. It really is that journey to authentic self. And for people that are, wanting to take that medicine path with the support, pre, after, and all this, like, what is currently available in Australia for people, to take that medicine path?
Currently, we are going through a lot of legislative changes in terms of the use of psilocybin and MDMA. Not to say that it's not being utilised already in the underground circles. Let's be honest, there's always going to be an underground circle to these things, given their clear benefit back from the 50s and 60s with clear research. At the moment, we have $15 million of research that's gone into funding the psychedelics for the use of them in healing. And a lot of the work's coming from a group called Mind Medicine that's been headed off by Tanya De Jong and Peter Hunt, who've done incredible work to radically change the perception of psychedelic medicine in Australia. I was part of the first cohort of practitioners that were trained in Australia on the use of MDMA and psilocybin for the use in trauma and depression. And now the second cohort is going through, as well as there's a MAPS training that's happening down in Melbourne. And so we've got now we're going to find is a flooding of practitioners that are going to be aware and educated around the medicines in Australia. And from that, a lot of them will be psychologists and counsellors that will have awareness around trauma and the importance of integration of trauma. And that already exists. There's a lot of practitioners offering integration of psychedelic medicines out there. And I would really invite to have that set up before a person was to engage in a medicine journey, because that is the thing that will prevent a person becoming a dependent and seeking that state of consciousness, rather than doing the physical work that's required and the mental work to be able to find that within themselves and open up that stream of the water that then becomes a river, to allow that light to permeate through. There's medicine journeys happening with ayahuasca and San Pedro and psilocybin and MDMA already happening in the underground scenes. And people may find those along their journey, and making sure that they sit with somebody that's trusted and that has a reverence and a acknowledgement and a sincerity of the importance of integration. Because I've seen a lot of people go to shamans or medicine people, and they get blasted open, and they're left afterwards with the aftermath of that. And that can lead to some damaging effects long term, to be honest with you. And it may take years for that person to recalibrate to come back into function. Most people are generally pretty okay, but even for the best of us out there, that aspect of integration, if it's not present, then there's a spiral up, there's also a spiral down that occurs as well as a polarization of that, because ultimately we have to find that 0 point in the middle.
I love what you said before, like it really is about self-responsibility. And that's one of the key agreements that I give to any client, is like, I'm not fixing you. It's an individual's choosing a medicine, choosing to meditate, choosing experience, and they are responsible for their own healing. It's not the shaman or the doctor or whatever it is. Like, someone's got to be open, willing to first heal themselves, or be open to the possibility of that. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what consciousness or practitioner has. It's not going to get through unless that person has really chosen, to be responsible for that. And that's the key. And There's one more question I want to ask, but before I ask that question, is there anything you just want to share or speak to that you feel is important, or that is just really relevant that we haven't touched on, in terms of your work, the medicines, health, anything at all?
I think the aspect of compassion is important through all this, is that to have compassion on self and compassion for another ultimately is it's the greatest window of healing can occur in our younger part of our life, when we've had the least amount of trauma built up and it hasn't had the sediments densify to the degree that the body is holding on to it in the later part of life and causes the disease to block the flow from the body. And so that having compassion for that journey and realizing, well, it's sitting with what is now, and not attaching to a false perception of what needs to be, but just really having a regular practice to drop in and see the current state of where things are and having compassion to that. And really forgiving yourself for whatever may have happened before, whatever path you've chosen to take, whatever ifs or ands you could have done, and just seeing it all as a perfect unfolding of your soul's journey in this lifetime, and taking that step towards what serves you and serves those around you, and being strong enough to take those steps. That we are impacted most by the 5 people we spend our time with. And so as we choose to take that hero's journey and take that path forward, is also to help permeate and support those around us to make the transformation, but to anchor that within ourselves is to hold compassion for that and for others.
Yeah, I love that. And when I think of compassion, I always just channel the Dalai Lama, just his energy, and I heard people say, how can compassion or love or things like this that are more soft change the world or make an impact? But as you kind of said, starting this conversation, it's like when we study the physical reality, the organs, the body, the medicine, all these hard things, you look back to the root cause, right, of the disease or what's there. It's like, okay, we can deal with the symptom, put the bandaid on. But when we go back and back and back, we see it's actually that the lighter, the spirit that is creating the matter, the consciousness creating the matter. And compassion as an energy, the word we've given to this emotional energy for self and others. And in my work, there's the inner child, but bring in the distinction of the inner teenager who wants to fit in and survive school. And then the inner adult, the trauma, there's trauma in different stages, and they're different traumas, is to have compassion for all those stages, parts of self. And then when we meet another, and with the current world situation showing there's a lot of polarity, it's showing us that there's not one reality. There's not, we've awoken to, there are many realities, perspectives, and everyone's in a different, seeing people lose compassion for another person that's in a different reality. Coming in with the hard perspective or the hard thing, but actually to come back to, well, that person has an inner child, has an inner teenager, has their experiences, and how to bring compassion can be one of the most, doesn't matter whether we're right or wrong or trying to prove to someone or bring them to our side of the scientific table. It's actually the compassion and that energy that can be the most powerful and healing and opening for self and another, that actually brings that transformation around. So I love that message. Yeah. And for you, my last question is, where to from here? Your passion, what's ahead? Where's your energy going? What are you creating? Yeah.
Building Australia's first retreat centre and programs for the preparation and integration of psychedelic medicine.
Mm.
I see the arduous journey that takes a person from start to self responsibility, and I want to make that journey as simple and as profound and as easy for them to make that leap into themselves as possible. And so I've developed my reset program and reset retreats supporting that. And in the process of now bringing together the team and the retreat center and activating that, because we're going to have a floodgate of people coming through the trauma that's coming through the planet at the moment, and the toxins and everything that's coming through. There's going to be a large need for that healing transformation. And so I'm excited to birth that, because it's, since I've activated that, I've seen so much synchronicity, and it makes sense. The medicines are aligning us to source energy. And so if I'm aligning myself for the preparation, integration of a medicine journey, whether it becomes legalized of MDMA or psilocybin, or whether somebody chooses to walk a different path with like ayahuasca or San Pedro or peyote or other ones. But since aligning to that path in my own way, knowing I no longer need to go back to the medicines to seek that remembrance, that stream of consciousness is opened up, that is now a river that I'm able to access and able to tap into. But how do I now keep that river alive, and how do I help others to find their own river and their own stream through that? And since aligned to that mission, the synchronicity of spirit has been profound, profound. And so I'm trusting that, because I used to experience synchronicity all the time, but there's been a lull for a period of time, and I was like realizing, well, the universe has got its contraction and expansion point. And so in that contraction of learning and inner journey, now also the aspect of the expansion and taking those cultivation of those learnings to bring into fruition what my soul is here to do. And so that's one mission that I'm developing, is the preparation and integration of psychedelic medicines. And the other pathway I'm focusing also on is developing holistic programs for general practitioners. Yeah. And so that they can, as their roles is as a general practitioner, as a health practitioner, also opening it up to beyond GPs, is to be able to know how to provide an integrative approach, combining their own unique skill base with Chinese medicine and naturopathy and craniosacral and all these other different modalities, to be able to support an individual on their journey as they go through life. Because it doesn't take any one individual or therapist or practitioner to support that individual. Each person has got their own stream of consciousness that in aligning that team of people for that individual, you're allowing the higher self or those individuals and their stream of consciousness to support the different reflections of that person in the center to find their own way through by the different kaleidoscope, the different jigsaw pieces of their own unique consciousness to awaken again. That's on a deeper level, but I won't necessarily say that in that way, but that's really ultimately what's happening.
Amazing. And I love that. I just even posted something yesterday that said the only really reality here is through, and science is through the experiencer, the perception of the experiencer. When you say that even it's a team, it does require, every human or thing is a different reflection for a different part of self, and there's something there's wisdom in that. There's that model of, we start off as codependent to independent to interdependence, and that is the evolution. No longer just it's the interdependence. It's like the mycelium network, to understand that it all takes each other. And even for someone on their healing journey, it's all connected. It's not just myself all alone, but it's also not just self with one person. It's, as you said, the 5 people you surround yourself with. It is the community. It takes the village to raise the child. And yeah, what you spoke to there is just beautiful. And for the program that you're working with for GPs and other practitioners, are you doing that solo? Do you have a team? And how are you finding the receptiveness of people that this may be new for, you know, GPs, or is there a receptiveness, or is there some education and some still to go in terms of that?
That project probably takes longer. In the moment in the development stage, working with a naturopath and bringing in a Chinese medicine doctor to provide education as well, and that still looks calling a team to bring that vision forward. But the seeds are seeded and they're sprouted. But it's a big mission to also educate general practitioners in Australia and to hold that caliber of expertise involves self skilling further to be able to hold that to the degree that's required to hold it. And so as I develop the medicine also develops me also.
Yeah. Just want to acknowledge you in that, because for GPs, or that being your clientele, or that your target is, understand they have such a strong education, left brain thinking, it almost becomes a macro control mechanism where, as you kind of say, you have to bring in the best and have it meet their left brain, right? And you know, knowing you're embodied in your experience. Like for myself, I'm embodied in my experience. I personally don't bother too much about reading all the things or doing all the bits, because I'm just like, it's about the experience for me. I don't need to prove the science. And so I just want to acknowledge you in that you are working in both those worlds, and it requires you to bring such rigor and attention to detail to your work, because it is a mission that goes beyond just creating something. It's an education, it's actual change and transformation that you're working to in an industry, and that I just want to acknowledge that. And I also just hear in you, you know, the hero's journey. Some say that, 0 to 30, we're seeking 30 to 50 is consolidation, 50 onwards is the mastery. And I don't actually know how old you are, you don't have to say, but I just hear that on this hero's journey of, the young man traveling and seeking the trauma and, studying, and then, I imagine in your 30s to 50s that the medicine, the consolidation, the finding your voice, I imagine you're somewhere around that 50 cusp. It's like you're in that stage, I see at least, of creating that mastery of soul mission to be of greatest service to the collective, of everything you've sought and experienced is coming together now for that, so yeah.
Thank you. No, really deeply gratitude for the space and for this opportunity. And it's where I'm in the cusp at the moment. In 2 days' time, I turn 42. And so they say we go in cycles of 7, 14, and 28 is another big cycle. 35 but 42 is where we step into our spiritual gifts and our offering into that potency. And so I'm at the cusp of now stepping into that. And so thank you for being present with me in this really important cusp period and offering me this opportunity to share and to explore what I've learned so far, and to share with the public connected with you, and what I've learned so far, and from my practices and my medicine. And I feel I've still got a lot to learn, but it is been the consolidation phase of what I've learned in the earlier phase. And what a wise teacher shared with me once was, because I asked him, what are your thoughts on travel? And he says to me, as we walk barefoot through different parts of the earth, we awaken different parts of our consciousness. And so there's an invitation in that for those that are out there that are in their youth, in their first 30 years of their life, go travel. Go awaken different parts of your consciousness. Walk barefoot, jump in the rivers, jump in the oceans, sit with the cultures, sit with the elders, sing music, play, dance, explore. Allow your consciousness to ground in what it is that you wish to embody and consolidate in your later stage of your life, so that even though your body may change, your consciousness of what you've planted in your consciousness remains alive with you. And that it becomes the wisdom of the elder that awakens within you to help transform the society that we're in and awaken an eldership that is required deeply in this country, across the world, to embrace a new world.
Thank you for that message. It's medicine for me. And you saying you're turning 42, might have overestimated there the 50, but it's like I feel you stepping into that now, and your eldership has, age to me also is a bit of an illusion. There is wisdom that comes with it because of the years in this body and life, but to know that your soul is infinite and the wisdom is infinite. And when you share that, for me, I'm 30, and it was turning 30 was a death again and a rebirth. It felt like this is the next phase. The seeker, parts of the seeker dies, and it's time to ground in something new. And I'm currently, not in this moment, but I'm most meant to be. I'm heading back out sailing on the ocean, and that's been medicine and experience to just be on water, on an ocean, on a boat that moves, that follows the wind. And Hawaii is calling me in January next year, and there's a part of me that's like, oh, I just want to ground now. I just want to be in the soul partnership. I just want to be on the land, but it's like you sharing that message just goes, hang on a minute, like just patience again, like 30. Okay. In some story in society where it's, get married, do the job, have kids, maybe that's like, but that's, that's not the story I'm living in. And it's just, yes, it's validation for me too, because Hawaii has been calling me in for years. Like I have never been, I know there is something to awaken there, and I've been saying to, but I cannot commit to a land or a long-term relationship until there's something there. There's a key there for me that I know deep in my heart. And right now there's a bee just on the computer looking straight at me in the eyes. It's just sitting here. Yeah, if there's any of that, it's like it's looking right at me on the computer. And so just thank you for this exchange and this, and your energy and what you're up to. And I look forward to continuing to just witness it and support you. And as I said earlier, like I really feel your eldership has played a role for me. While we've not connected a lot, we have connected deeply. And for me, eldership and wisdom is through embodiment and transmission, not necessarily, word or whatever. And how you've impacted me has now rippled out to many others through the skills or what's been granted to me, that now I can support others in that. So infinite blessings and thank you, and just full abundance to you as you, execute on these 2 missions. And lots of love.
Thank you.